The frigid February morning of 2020 began with an unusual disturbance on County Road 45. Four unmarked police vehicles quietly pulled up in front of a modest wooden cabin on the edge of Salida, Colorado. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as officers in tactical gear took positions around the property. Inside, 52-year-old Robert Manning was making his morning coffee, a habit he had maintained for more than 2 decades, ever since the blizzard night of 1997 that changed the entire town's life forever. A loud knock came at exactly 6:14 a.m. Robert Manning, Chaffee County Sheriff's Office. "We have a warrant for your detention in connection with the 1997 disappearance of Elias Cooper." The officers later described how the man's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, yet his face remained unnervingly calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment for the past 23 years. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss the latest cases. The winter of 1997 enveloped Salida, Colorado, in a thick, heavy blanket of snow that weighed down every roof, every winding mountain road, and cast an eerie silence over the entire Arkansas River Valley. This small town of just over 4,000 people was already quiet by nature, but now it sank even deeper into the dense atmosphere of mountain winds and blizzard, where every sound was swallowed by the biting gusts sweeping down from the Sawatch Range. Darkness fell early. Dim yellow streetlights barely pierced the swirling snow, making the landscape appear blurred by cold and shadow. Against that backdrop, 42-year-old Elias Cooper, a carpenter well known in the Poncha Springs and Salida communities, finished a long day at his small woodworking shop. He was a familiar figure in the area, hard-working, reserved, and devoted to his trade for over 20 years. When the last machines in the shop fell silent, Elias slipped on the yellow rain jacket that had served him for years and stepped out into the yard, now marked only by swirling white ridges carved by the wind. A neighbor who lived nearby happened to see Elias pull up his collar, hunch against the gale, and head toward his pickup truck. Outside, the wind was so strong that visibility shrank by the minute, his hair was whipped sideways by the mountain gusts, and his steps grew heavy in the deepening snow. The neighbor only caught sight of Elias's yellow jacket, moving a few dozen yards before it vanished completely into the white curtain of snow, heading toward County Road 140. The route he always took back to Salida. After that moment, no one ever saw Elias Cooper's journey again. When night fully fell and the storm intensified, the lights in Elias's house remained on, but the front door never opened as it usually did. His wife and children started calling, first thinking he was stuck in traffic or had pulled over somewhere to wait out the wind. But call after call went unanswered, met only with silence. Anxiety spread quickly. The family split up to search the routes Elias normally took, from the area near the Poncha Springs shop to the edge of Salida, but they found only howling wind, blinding snow, and total darkness. There was no sign of his truck, no headlights moving on the roads, and no local resident had seen him stop at any store or gas station along the way. The unease grew with every passing minute, especially as the weather turned even more brutal. Slow drives along the mountain passes yielded nothing but emptiness, and very quickly the family realized Elias had vanished in an unnatural way right in the heart of the town he had lived in his whole life. When every spontaneous search attempt failed, and the sense of danger became unmistakable amid the thick snow, the family decided to contact the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office to report that Elias Cooper was missing. That call came into the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office dispatch on a night that cut like a knife, and the moment the information was logged, the duty officer immediately recognized the urgency of the situation. Weather in the Arkansas River Valley was deteriorating fast, temperatures plummeting and visibility on many roads reduced to virtually zero, making any disappearance under these conditions a potential life-threatening emergency. A patrol unit was dispatched immediately to the Cooper residence after gathering initial details from the family. Elias had left the Poncha Springs shop late in the afternoon, had not returned home at his usual time, could not be reached, and no one in the family or among neighbors had seen him for hours. The patrol moved slowly through fierce crosswinds and fresh snow that constantly covered tire tracks. When they arrived, they confirmed the house was exactly as the family described: living room lights still on, no signs of forced entry, front door and windows intact, snow evenly covering the front steps, indicating no one had come or gone since the storm intensified. Inside, the patrol conducted an initial safety sweep. The living room was tidy, sofa and coffee table showed no signs of hurried use. The kitchen was neat, no pots on the stove or half-prepared food. Bedroom and hallways had nothing out of place. The garage showed no indication Elias had returned or that anyone else had been there. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken objects, no unfamiliar footprints, nothing unusual suggesting an outsider had been present recently. This led police to assess that the reason Elias never made it home most likely lay outside the house itself. After completing the initial scene check and taking family statements, police opened a missing and endangered adult file, a classification used for adults who disappear under conditions that put them in immediate danger, especially when severe weather is a direct risk factor. They then began gathering the information needed to reconstruct Elias's final known activities. On January 17th, the shift team contacted the Poncha Springs woodworking shop to confirm the time Elias left work. The owner confirmed Elias finished his shift late in the afternoon, shut down the machines, and locked up following normal procedure. A neighbor near the shop was also confirmed as a witness. The person saw Elias in his yellow rain jacket walking toward his pickup truck just before the evening blizzard grew fiercer. Police logged that moment as the last time Elias was clearly seen. After collecting information from the shop, police focused on reconstructing Elias's schedule that day, the jobs he had worked on, appointments noted in his work log, his health condition, daily routines, and regular travel patterns between Poncha Springs and Salida. The family provided additional details. Elias had no plans to go anywhere other than straight home. His phone had received no unusual calls or messages before contact was lost, and he was not in the habit of changing plans without telling anyone. These facts led police to initially conclude that Elias's disappearance could not be treated as a voluntary departure. Outside, snow and wind continued lashing the eaves, making movement difficult but not stopping the patrol from completing the scene documentation and collecting initial statements inside the Cooper home. As soon as the safety sweep ended, the Chaffee County investigation team immediately shifted focus to the next priority, building the most accurate timeline possible of the hours leading up to Elias's disappearance. This required collecting full statements from everyone who had seen or interacted with Elias on the day he vanished, including co-workers, customers, and individuals living or working near the Poncha Springs shop. A small group was assigned to return to the shop to speak directly with the owner and anyone present that day. They learned Elias had started work early as usual, spending most of the day in the cutting area and finishing details on recent furniture orders. Coworkers described him as completely normal, focused, quiet, showing no worry or anything out of the ordinary. Two customers who stopped by around noon said Elias greeted them with his usual calm demeanor, briefly discussed designs, then returned to work. No one mentioned any arguments or behavior that raised concern. Based on statements from everyone at the shop, police determined Elias finished his workday late in the afternoon, cleaned his workstation, turned off equipment, and locked the shop before leaving. That moment was treated as the last verified activity. Cross-checking the shop clock and statements from the owner and coworkers, police agreed Elias left the shop just before the blizzard intensified, a critical factor when assessing travel feasibility and possible routes. One neighbor near the shop reported seeing Elias in his yellow rain jacket step into the yard as the wind picked up. The same witness also mentioned noticing an old dark blue van parked not far from the shop gate, present around the time Elias was preparing to leave. According to the witness, the van seemed to have arrived before Elias exited the building, and although no clear interaction between Elias and anyone in the van was observed, its presence at that specific time became a detail worth noting. Police added this to the timeline for further review, to determine any possible connection to Elias's movements. With the departure time from the shop established and key statements collected, investigators turned to evaluating the blizzard's impact on all possible travel. Patrol officers on duty at the time reported winds reducing visibility to just a few meters on some stretches, especially between Poncha Springs and the edge of Salida. Rapid snowfall made roads slick and could cover tire tracks within minutes, making tracing Elias's route far more difficult than in normal missing person cases. Investigators reviewed local maps and compiled a list of routes Elias was likely to have taken based on years of habit. The main route connected Poncha Springs directly to central Salida, the one he drove home every afternoon. A secondary route passed through open land near the forest edge, sometimes used by Elias to avoid traffic on the main road or to stop at small roadside stores. Police also considered a less traveled route that looped near the Arkansas River, an area with little traffic and many treacherous winter sections. All these routes were prioritized by how frequently Elias used them in daily life, while factoring in weather conditions to estimate how far he could have traveled before the storm became life-threatening. Once the timeline was complete and probable routes identified, Chaffee County forces immediately moved to the next phase, launching a nighttime search as weather conditions continued to worsen. The blizzard buried the roads linking Poncha Springs and Salida, forcing patrol units to run full high-beam headlights and crawl along to avoid skidding or losing control on ice. Beams of yellow light swept across pine stands, reflecting off fresh snow in ghostly ribbons, but unable to penetrate the thick white wall of wind roaring down from the Sawatch Range. 2 patrol vehicles were sent along the main route Elias normally took. They drove every segment slowly, scanning ditches, shoulders, pull-offs, and small turnouts leading downhill, but continuous snowfall erased any potential tire tracks within minutes. Even lightly traveled sections became indistinguishable under deep snow, making it impossible to spot anything unusual. In parallel, police deployed a K-9 unit specialized in missing person searches in rough terrain. Tracking dogs were released at the Poncha Springs shop, the last place Elias was clearly seen. But after only a few dozen meters, his scent trail was completely wiped out by the storm. Constantly shifting winds made scent work unstable, sometimes leading the dogs in wrong directions or causing them to lose the trail entirely. Despite multiple attempts to restart from the beginning, results were the same. No usable scent trail could be held long enough to determine which way Elias had gone when he left the shop. Search teams continued checking the area around the shop, including the parking lot and the narrow road behind it, where a few old storage sheds stood. However, snow accumulated so fast that any footprints or tire marks were gone within minutes. Areas the neighbors said they had seen Elias were already completely covered, leaving no trace of human movement. After the shop area, teams shifted to the main road toward Salida. Every stretch was scanned in detail with headlights, from roadside trees to turnoffs leading to small ranches. They looked for any sign Elias might have pulled over, turned into a sheltered spot, or had an accident, but found nothing. Fresh snow kept falling, creating soft layers that could swallow evidence in moments. On some steeper sections, crosswinds piled snowdrifts across the road so thick that patrol vehicles had to slow to a crawl, making observation even harder. Officers noted that if Elias had run into trouble on the road at that time, any trace of it would likely have been erased before anyone could find it. To cover every possibility, teams expanded to secondary routes. Elias occasionally used the road along the Arkansas River and several small paths cutting through open land near the forest. Those routes were even more dangerous: rough surfaces, no guardrails in places, and visibility down to just a few meters in the blizzard. Still, they swept short sections whenever conditions allowed, but the result was the same: nothing. No stranded vehicle lights, no scattered car parts, no skid marks, no footprints, only endless thick white. As the search pushed deeper into the night, every piece of data painted the same picture: no clear evidence that Elias had traveled any of the routes police checked. The brutal weather had effectively wiped the entire area clean, turning every effort to find him into a race against layers of snow that kept burying clues. By the end of the night, search teams returned to base to review the areas already covered, preparing to reassess scope and strategy for the next steps, with not a single reliable footprint or tire track discovered. After the nighttime search yielded no reliable traces of Elias's journey, Chaffee County decided to mobilize the search and rescue force to expand the sweep area the following morning. As soon as weather conditions became somewhat more stable, although light snow was still falling and mountain winds remained strong, the violent blizzard of the previous night had subsided, allowing the specialized teams to launch a much broader search strategy than the area around the woodworking shop and the main route from Poncha Springs to Salida. 3 priority zones were clearly marked on the map: Monarch Pass to the west, the Arkansas River running along the valley, and Trout Creek Pass to the northeast. All areas Elias could have inadvertently driven into if he tried to avoid the main highway or was forced to change direction due to headwinds or visibility dropping too quickly. The search and rescue force split into several small teams, each assigned a distinct terrain sector. The first group headed toward Monarch Pass, the treacherous mountain road where numerous accidents had occurred in previous winters. Snow here was deeper, and winds swirling through the canyons created unpredictable gusts, making movement by patrol vehicles nearly impossible without chains and additional anti-skid equipment. The rescue team had to proceed slowly, stopping constantly to examine every road ditch, snowdrift that showed signs of collapse, or spots where a vehicle might have slid off the edge. Yet nothing unusual appeared: no fresh tire skid marks, no collapsed snowbanks, no vehicle debris, no footprints. The continuous snowfall from the previous night had erased any traces that might have existed. The second team covered the area along the Arkansas River, where the valley widens but the ground becomes more dangerous because snow can conceal deep gullies and steep banks leading straight down to the partially frozen river. Local residents had repeatedly warned that this was the most hazardous zone during a blizzard, since even a small steering error could send a vehicle plunging into the rocky shallows without leaving clear evidence on the surface. Search and rescue members spread out along the riverside road, scanning for sections of snow that appeared compressed or disturbed. They carefully checked every slope leading close to the water's edge, using probe poles and safety ropes to avoid slipping onto thin ice. Although many parts of the terrain showed snow sculpted into unusual waves by the wind, nowhere was there evidence of a pickup truck or pedestrian movement. Along the valley there was only the howl of the wind and the flat, white expanse of the ice-covered river. Meanwhile, the third team moved toward Trout Creek Pass, the intersection of numerous pine-forested routes and old trails once used by locals before the major highways were built. The terrain here was far more complex. Dense stands of pine trees limited visibility. Many narrow roads were already buried under knee-deep fresh snow, making it extremely difficult to distinguish old trail beds from natural ground. The searchers had to comb through each stretch of forest, pushing snow aside to check the softer earth beneath for signs of tire compression, but everything was untouched snow. Some slopes that could cause accidents in clear weather were now completely indistinguishable under the blanket of white. They were forced to mark every area already checked in case they needed to return if the weather changed or new leads emerged. When the teams returned to the temporary rally point to compile information, the entire expanded area, covering dozens of square miles, showed no indication whatsoever that Elias had passed through. There were no vehicle skid marks, no metal fragments, no snowslides, no unusually compressed snow patches, and no personal items left behind or dropped along the way. Even in the most dangerous sections where accidents were likely, the snow remained perfectly clean, as if no vehicle had traveled there since the storm began. This made the search teams fully aware of the difficulty they faced. The weather had erased every trace, turning Elias's entire journey, if he had indeed entered these areas, into a complete blank that could not be followed with the naked eye. Nevertheless, they continued expanding the search one more circle, moving deeper into the pine forests, re-sweeping secondary trails, and checking open clearings between major routes, hoping to find something different. The result, however, was the same as previous efforts: nothing but snow, wind, and the cold, characteristic silence of the Colorado mountains in winter. As daylight began to fade, The search and rescue teams returned to the rally point to report in detail all areas checked, confirming they had found no evidence or direct clues related to Elias or his pickup truck. The absolute emptiness across the entire expanded zone made determining Elias's direction of travel even more uncertain, while simultaneously reinforcing the conclusion that if any traces had existed in the hours after he lost contact, the violent blizzard the previous night had buried them all. Immediately after the search and rescue teams concluded the expanded search without finding any trace of Elias or his pickup truck, investigators shifted focus to canvassing residential areas along the routes. Elias regularly traveled, looking for indirect information, small memories, chance observations, anything that might help narrow down his movements before he disappeared. The weather had eased but remained bitterly cold, with thick snow covering porches and front yards, making the canvass slower and more time-consuming than usual. Officers worked in small groups, going door to door from the area near the Poncha Springs shop to the scattered homes along County Road 140 towards Salida. They explained the situation to each household and asked whether anyone had seen Elias's pickup truck, Elias himself, or any unusual activity on the late afternoon he vanished. Although many residents had known Elias for years and were shocked to hear he was missing, most said they had not gone outside during that time frame because the blizzard made visibility nearly zero. Some families reported hearing only the fierce howling of the wind and no other sounds related to vehicles or people. Police persistently extended the canvass to side roads leading to more isolated homes. At one house set a few hundred meters off the main route, a resident recalled seeing an old dark green van in the area around the time Elias left the shop. The van was unfamiliar to the neighborhood, and according to the witness, it stopped for only a short time before heading in the direction Elias normally drove home. The witness could not clearly see the driver and could not confirm any connection to Elias, but the detail was considered significant because it matched an earlier statement from someone living near the shop that a green van had appeared near the shop gate right as Elias was preparing to leave. Investigators carefully recorded the van's described features: older model, dark green paint, possibly peeling in places on the body. When pressed for more details about direction, exact timing, or license plate, the witness could provide nothing further because the weather was so bad and visibility was obscured by blowing snow. Still, the match between two independent accounts led police to treat the green van as a lead worth pursuing. After logging this information, the canvassing team continued through the remaining houses on the route. Some homes had windows facing directly onto the main road, but because of the heavy blizzard at the presumed time Elias passed, they saw no vehicles clearly. One household near an eastern curve said they had gone out a few times to shovel their driveway, but noticed no headlights or unusual movement on the road. None of the residents interviewed heard arguments, loud impacts, sudden braking, or any sound that might suggest an incident involving Elias. The entire residential corridor was canvassed for hours, and the result mirrored the earlier search zones. No witness saw Elias in distress on the road, no one heard a struggle, and no one noticed anything unusual at the critical time. Most statements collected simply emphasized the extremely poor weather conditions that kept residents indoors, resulting in virtually zero opportunity for observation during the key window. When the canvass concluded, investigators compiled the statements and determined that the only standout detail across the entire residential area was the appearance of the green van near the shop, and later near the route Elias normally took home. Beyond the timing coincidence, however, no witness provided additional specifics, and no one saw Elias interact with the van or encounter trouble along his usual path. These limitations kept the next phase of Elias's movements deadlocked, especially since any remaining traces were quickly erased by fresh snow. While mountain winds continued to blanket the Arkansas Valley with new layers of white, and the search teams prepared to reassess the entire area already covered, an unexpected call from the owner of a ranch near Hutchinson Ranch suddenly changed the situation. The caller reported a strange pickup truck on the edge of their property, covered under a thick layer of snow, as if it had been there for days. A patrol unit immediately headed to the described location and quickly confirmed the vehicle was indeed Elias Cooper's, the most important piece they had been searching for all week. The truck sat beside a small dirt road, with snowdrifts blown tightly around the wheels, indicating it had been there since the heaviest snowfall days earlier. The first thing that stood out was that the driver's door was unlocked and slightly ajar, held open a crack by packed snow. When officers cleared the snow and fully opened the door, they found the keys still in the ignition, an unusual detail given Elias's known habit of being careful about securing his vehicle. Inside the cab, the radio had been removed from the dashboard, leaving only exposed wires, but there were no signs of smashing or ransacking. The seats were not disarranged. The steering wheel and dashboard showed no scratches or signs of a struggle. The entire interior indicated no one had tried to hotwire or destroy anything inside. While collecting evidence, officers discovered a large fountain soda cup, the kind typically bought at gas stations, sitting in the center console cup holder. In the cold, the ice had long since melted into water, but condensation still clung inside the cup, showing it had been placed there while the cab was still sealed. The straw remained in the lid, with nothing unusual, except that the drink did not match Elias's known beverage preferences, according to family and coworkers. Near the passenger seat, they found a cracked pager, its screen fractured into multiple fine lines. It was unclear whether it had been dropped or struck hard, but it no longer functioned. The brand and model matched the type Elias used for work communication, though the damage prevented immediate determination of when it broke. Another item appeared in the driver's footwell, a small yellow cloth fragment with frayed edges, resembling the material of the rain jacket Elias wore the last day he was seen. The fabric was damp from snow, but not fully rotted, likely because it had been inside the sealed cab. However, its small size and off-position location meant police could not immediately confirm whether it tore from Elias's jacket or got caught when someone else moved inside the truck. Investigators searched the entire cab floor, seats, dashboard, door handles, floor mats, and rear area, but found no signs of violence at the scene. There was no blood, no drag marks, no other torn fabric besides the yellow piece, and no personal items left in an abnormal state. The glove compartment was open, but contained only the vehicle insurance papers, a few old receipts, and a worn pencil. The toolbox in the truck bed remained full and undisturbed, with nothing missing or showing recent use. The tailgate showed no fresh scratches or slide marks onto the ground. On the exterior, the thick snow cover had erased any possibility of identifying fingerprints or slide marks on the surface. However, wind patterns etched into the snow indicated the truck had not been moved since the blizzard peaked nearly a week earlier. There were no tire tracks around it because continuous snowfall had leveled the entire ground, making it impossible to determine the direction the truck arrived from or which way anyone left on foot. Officers documented the truck's full condition, marked the location of each item of evidence, and photographed the cab from multiple angles for the case file. What struck investigators most was not the presence of obvious criminal signs, but the complete absence of any indication of what happened to Elias after the truck arrived here. The vehicle showed no accident damage, was not stuck, had no collision marks with surrounding terrain, and no evidence it was abandoned in chaos. Everything gave the impression the truck had simply been stopped, the door opened, the keys left in the ignition, and then abandoned in the snow, a detail that made speculation even harder. After completing the initial search and evidence collection, police secured the scene and prepared to tow the truck to a storage facility for deeper forensic analysis. In a situation where not a single trace in the surrounding area could tell them who drove it there, why it was left behind, or what happened to Elias afterward. Immediately after Elias's pickup truck was towed to the storage yard for analysis, all physical evidence recovered from the cabin, including the large soda cup, the broken pager, and the yellow fabric fragment suspected to be from Elias's raincoat, was transferred to the Chaffee County lab for examination under the 1997 protocols. At that time, DNA testing and biological trace processing technology were severely limited, especially for samples that had been exposed for an extended period to freezing temperatures, moisture, snow, or harsh weather in general. The technicians began with the most promising item, the soda cup. Although a thin layer of condensation still remained inside, the chances of recovering DNA from the rim of the lid, or the straw, were greatly reduced due to unfavorable storage conditions. When the sample was analyzed, the lab found that most potential epithelial cells had been destroyed by deep freezing, and whoever had handled the cup may have been wearing gloves or only touched it indirectly. The 1997 generation DNA analysis equipment could only process samples containing a sufficiently large quantity of biological material, so the final result was that no usable DNA profile was obtained from the soda cup. Moving on to the pager, the technicians encountered difficulties from the very first step. The device was already old and fragile, and it was now cracked, with a shattered screen and a slightly warped internal circuit board from impact force. When they opened the casing for inspection, they discovered the entire memory was no longer intact. The mechanical damage prevented many chips from making proper contact with data-reading equipment. The lab attempted to use an older pager reader with a compatible port, but the system repeatedly returned errors because the board would not respond to signals. Since the data could not be recovered, the pager was retained only as an indeterminate piece of evidence and provided no specific information about any calls or messages Elias might have received shortly before he vanished. The yellow fabric fragment was examined next. Although its color and material were quite similar to the raincoat Elias was known to wear according to family descriptions, the technician could not reach a definitive conclusion. The piece was too small and had been soaked inside the cab from melting snow, causing the fibers to mat together. Under microscopic examination, the lab noted some synthetic fiber characteristics consistent with those used in commercial raincoats during the 1990s, but this was insufficient to pinpoint a specific origin. There were no seams or edging that could be matched to the raincoat Elias typically used, and the local lab's fiber analysis technology at the time was not sophisticated enough to produce a legally conclusive result. Technicians also searched the fabric for biological traces in hopes of recovering skin cells or hairs, but repeated soaking had washed away most potential evidence. After completing the process, the results were no more promising than those from the other items. In addition to the three primary items, the lab conducted a general examination of the truck cab for fingerprints or contact traces. However, the cold snow and moisture had rendered many surfaces incapable of retaining clear prints. A few faint smudges were detected but lacked sufficient characteristics for comparison. Even less affected areas such as the interior door handles yielded nothing, possibly because the person involved wore gloves, or because snow accumulation had obliterated ridge detail. After many hours of testing, the complete findings were compiled and sent to investigators. No DNA recovered, no data restored from the pager, unable to confirm whether the fabric belonged to Elias's raincoat, and no usable fingerprints. The technicians noted that nearly all evidence had been severely compromised by temperature and weather conditions, while the vehicle was abandoned in the blizzard, resulting in a higher than normal degree of degradation. Although the procedures had been fully carried out according to 1997 standards, the lab had to conclude that no significant progress could be made that would help narrow suspects or clarify what happened to Elias after his truck appeared near Hutchinson Ranch. This left the missing person case continuing to lack clear leads, forcing investigators to explore other avenues since the physical evidence could not provide any breakthrough. With the lab yielding no breakthroughs, investigators returned to reviewing individuals who had prior conflicts or disputes with Elias. And the first name that surfaced was Victor Hale, a mechanic who had worked alongside Elias on a mill renovation project in Buena Vista 2 years earlier. Records from 1997 show that the two men had initially been on friendly terms, but the relationship soured when Victor accused Elias of withholding a payment from the project owner and blamed him for causing Victor to lose a subcontract. Although there was no clear evidence the conflict went beyond professional arguments, police noted that Victor had made heated statements, including telling a former coworker that he never wanted to see Elias's face again. Seeing potential risk in this relationship, the investigative team considered whether Victor might have a motive to harm Elias, especially given the no-trace circumstances of the disappearance. They first attempted to reconstruct Victor's timeline on the day Elias went missing. Victor stated he had left Buena Vista in the afternoon to visit relatives in Leadville and stayed overnight. Police sought confirmation from the relatives he mentioned, who confirmed he had stopped by but could not recall the exact time of arrival. Telephone records from the relative's landline showed one call placed that evening, but the timing did not fully align with the window Victor described. When cross-referenced with weather conditions, the blizzard had closed many roads between Buena Vista, Leadville, and Salida. The team concluded that the trip Victor claimed would have been difficult to complete in the time frame he initially provided. This prompted authorities to scrutinize his timeline more closely. When formally interviewed at the Chaffee County office, Victor said he left Buena Vista around 5 p.m., but when asked why he remembered that specific time so clearly, he offered no reasonable explanation. In a second statement, the departure time shifted to before it got completely dark, a broader and vaguer window. When questioned about the green van a witness had seen near the Poncha Springs shop shortly before Elias left, an indication police were checking key locations, Victor appeared flustered but completely denied any connection, even though he had previously owned an older dark green pickup that he sold the previous summer. Police requested records of the sale, but the cash transaction included only minimal buyer information and an unverifiable address. This made tracing the current owner of that vehicle more difficult, though still not enough to charge Victor. Investigators also analyzed potential motive. Although the conflict with Elias had once been intense, Victor had since secured steady work at a small garage in Granite, with better income than during their dispute. His family confirmed he had not mentioned Elias in over a year. These factors lowered the likelihood of a personal motive, but did not eliminate it entirely. Investigators continued pressing Victor about the period of heaviest snowfall. He claimed he didn't remember exactly because he was driving through thick snow. However, weather reports showed traffic between Buena Vista and Leadville was essentially paralyzed during the hours Victor said he was traveling. When asked for more route details, Victor changed his story, first saying he took Highway 24, then claiming he went via Cottonwood Pass, a route that had been closed for weeks due to snow. This was the most significant inconsistency in Victor's statements. Still, the contradictions alone were not sufficient to direct prosecution or uncover incriminating evidence. Police attempted to place Victor in the Salida area on the day Elias disappeared, but found no witnesses or records confirming it. In 1997, there were no widespread private security cameras, and the mountainous region had only limited analog cell coverage. All of this made pinpointing Victor's location during the blizzard night effectively impossible. Although the inconsistencies kept Victor on the watch list, authorities could gather no additional physical evidence or indications that he was near Poncha Springs or Hutchinson Ranch on the day Elias vanished. No DNA, no vehicle tracks, no one saw Victor in the relevant areas, and no motive strong enough to prove criminal intent. Ultimately, the investigative team had to classify Victor Hale as a person of potential interest, but lacking direct or circumstantial evidence weighty enough to elevate him to official suspect status, leaving the case still without clear direction. While Victor Hale remained on the persons of interest list, investigators moved on to the second individual, Robert Manning, a name previously linked to Elias through a highly charged incident in 1991. 6 years before Elias disappeared, Elias and Manning had been involved in a serious traffic accident on the highway near Texas Creek. When Elias's vehicle slid on ice and rear-ended the old sedan Manning was driving. Although property damage was minor and Manning sustained only light injuries to his shoulder and neck, bad blood began from that moment. According to the 1991 police report, Manning shouted at Elias at the scene, accusing him of reckless driving and nearly killing him. The two men had to be separated by arriving troopers because Manning kept advancing angrily toward Elias. Though the incident did not result in criminal charges, multiple witnesses reported hearing Manning say he would make Elias pay for it, a statement noted in the report, but not deemed serious enough to constitute a criminal threat. Nevertheless, it provided grounds for the 1997 investigators to re-examine the history when Elias vanished under mysterious circumstances. Digging deeper, police discovered Manning had a scattered criminal record in Fremont County that included minor drug possession, bar fights, and one suspected auto parts theft that lacked sufficient evidence for charges. While most offenses were disorderly conduct or property-related, his file indicated a tendency toward violence when drinking and associations with other individuals who had prior convictions in the Canyon City area. Several of Elias's former co-workers said that for years after the accident, Manning openly brought up the old incident when running into them at local bars, making remarks such as, "A guy like that needs to learn a lesson." Although he had not directly mentioned Elias in the period immediately before the disappearance, the persistence of the grudge made investigators unable to dismiss him. When brought in for formal questioning, Manning was cooperative but visibly irritated whenever Elias's name came up. He described the 1991 accident as a small thing long over, yet avoided eye contact with investigators when answering questions about the day Elias went missing. Manning stated he had spent the entire day in Canyon City working at a private garage, but investigators could find no one to confirm his presence. The garage owner said Manning had come in to work on vehicles sometime that week, but could not recall the exact day or time. When asked about his vehicle, Manning said the old sedan had been sold years earlier, and that his current truck was a brown pickup, unrelated to the green van a witness saw near the Poncha Springs shop. However, when asked whether he knew anyone in his Fremont County circle who owned a green van, Manning gave evasive answers, saying things like "everybody in Fremont has some old rig," which investigators flagged as an unusual response. The team also evaluated whether Manning might have a revenge motive after years of harboring resentment, but they found no indication he had been stalking or contacting Elias in the recent past. No one placed Manning in Salida, Poncha Springs, or any related area that day. The blizzard made travel between Fremont and Chaffee counties extremely difficult, and there was no evidence Manning had left the Canyon City area during the worst weather. Police attempted to match Manning's tire tread to the very faint, nearly indistinguishable marks around Hutchinson Ranch, where Elias's truck was recovered, but thick snow and wind erosion rendered the effort useless. There were no fingerprints from Manning inside Elias's truck, no phone connections, and no witnesses placing him within the relevant radius. Although Manning fit the profile of someone who could have motive due to the old grudge and volatile temperament, every objective assessment showed no physical evidence linking him to the disappearance. In the end, Robert Manning was classified as a person of potential interest, but without sufficient legal or investigative grounds to designate him an official suspect, leaving the case still mired in the absence of concrete leads. When the lines of inquiry surrounding Victor Hale and Robert Manning successively reached dead ends, the investigation team went back to re-examine the witnesses who had appeared in the initial reports, and among them, the name Kendra Boyd emerged as a particularly significant case, not because she held a lot of information, but because she was the only person who had ever seen Elias interacting with a stranger near the Poncha Springs shop at a time very close to when he disappeared. Kendra, who lived in a mobile home just a few hundred meters from the shop, regularly walked past the area on her way to her family's small grocery store in the center of Poncha Springs. On the afternoon Elias left the shop, she remembered seeing him standing beside the parking area behind the building, where the slanting winter afternoon light filtered through the pines and created patches of shadow that were hard to distinguish. In that brief moment, she saw Elias talking to a man she had never seen before. Average height, wearing a dark-colored coat and a hood that covered most of his face. According to Kendra, the conversation did not appear tense, but it wasn't entirely normal either. She felt Elias was standing slightly back, while the other man was standing close to a dark green van parked near the entrance to the property. When the investigators came to her, Kendra was flustered and cautious. She admitted she had stayed silent during the first week because she was scared, not of Elias, but of that stranger. She wasn't sure whether he was connected to Elias's disappearance, but the fact that the green van had appeared at exactly that time and place had left her constantly uneasy. Kendra explained that in winter, the shop area was usually very deserted, and the sudden appearance of an unfamiliar vehicle that didn't fully cover its license plate had made her wary from the start. When pressed for more details, she could only recall that the van was an older model, long-bodied, dark green with some fading on the rear doors. There was a silver scratch on the hood, like a mark made by something hard rubbing against it. She didn't see the license plate because it was obscured by accumulated snow. As for the man, Kendra could only describe him as a few centimeters taller than Elias, somewhat thin, with a low voice, but speaking so quietly that she couldn't make out the words. The important thing was that after Elias left the shop, she saw the van pull out of the parking area and head toward the dirt road leading to Highway 50. She didn't see Elias or the man get into the van, but the timing of the vehicle's departure coincided exactly with when Elias was finishing his workday. Although Kendra's statement had some value, she could not confirm whether Elias had gotten into the van, nor could she definitively say the stranger was with Elias right before he left the area. The pressure of being the only witness who saw the stranger made her even more guarded, resulting in her providing less information than the investigators had hoped. Nevertheless, her account was fully recorded, especially the description of the green van and the direction it took when leaving the shop area. This was the rare detail that appeared repeatedly in various statements. The green van became one of the key elements the investigation was forced to continue pursuing in a case that remained buried in white snow and devoid of clear leads. The final information gathered from Kendra Boyd's statement helped the investigation open a new line of inquiry centered on the green van and the stranger, but when search teams checked the areas around Poncha Springs and Salida, they found no vehicle matching the description and no additional witnesses who had seen the van moving after the time Elias left the shop. The complete lack of security cameras in 1997 meant the entire route from Poncha Springs to Salida, as well as the side roads leading to residential areas and trails along the valley, was virtually impossible to trace using technical means. No images, no tire tracks, no cell signal data. Every effort to reconstruct Elias's movements after the last time he was seen became hazy. The primary scene, the vehicle abandoned near Hutchinson Ranch, contained no physical evidence strong enough for legal weight. No blood, no usable DNA samples, no fingerprints, no violently damaged or disturbed items, and the remaining evidence such as the soda cup, broken pager, or yellow cloth fragment provided no clear information. The individuals initially considered, like Victor Hale or Robert Manning, had inconsistencies in their statements, but the inconsistencies were not severe enough to support charges, especially since no objective data linked them to the time and place of Elias's disappearance. The few witnesses provided fragmented information that lacked cross-verification. Even the information about the green van rested solely on the description of one person, Kendra Boyd, a description that lacked detail about the license plate, exact make and model, or other critical identifying features. After more than a year of searching using every available method, from ground sweeps, K-9 units, expanded searches, door-to-door canvassing, witness interviews, to reconstructing timelines of potential suspects, the result remained unchanged. No body, no traces, no perpetrator, and no new investigative direction. Elias's complete absence left the case impossible to clearly classify as a voluntary disappearance, an accident in blizzard conditions, or an organized criminal act. Scattered pieces of information like the green van, the stranger, the broken pager, or the yellow cloth, all stopped at the level of suspicion and could not be connected into a complete logical chain. From 1998 to 1999, the volume of reports grew, but the number of substantive leads did not change. The Chaffee County Sheriff's Office had to admit they had exhausted all viable investigative avenues with the resources and technology available at the time. By the end of 1999, after nearly 3 years without significant progress, the Elias Cooper case was officially classified as a cold case and transferred to the Cold Case Unit of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. This was an important but heavy milestone. The file was closed at the active level, only to be reopened if new information emerged, while Elias's family was forced to face the reality that his disappearance was gradually being swallowed by time, without answers and without justice. 2 decades after the Elias Cooper file was moved to cold case status, the lives of those involved seemed to branch off in different directions, but the common thread was that all were covered by a layer of dust from time, exhaustion, and questions that were never answered. Elias's family, his ex-wife, brother, and 2 sisters, continued small-scale search efforts for many years, sending flyers to nearby towns, posting notices on supermarket bulletin boards in Salida, contacting Colorado missing persons volunteer groups, and even repeatedly driving the old mountain routes themselves, where they believed Elias might have met with misfortune. But every trip returned in silence, without a sign, without a new clue, and without any confirmation that he was still alive or dead. As the years passed, personal search efforts gradually diminished, not because they gave up, but because they were exhausted. For them, Elias's disappearance was not just an unsolved case, but an unfillable void in the family, a missing not having answers to grieve fully, nor realistic hope to hold on to. Meanwhile, the 2 individuals who had once been on the suspect list, Victor Hale and Robert Manning, each drifted in very different directions. Victor left Buena Vista in the early 2000s, moved to Delta County to work repairing agricultural machinery, and lived a quiet life that attracted almost no attention. He never got into any further legal trouble and did nothing to draw the interest of local police. Occasionally, when new coworkers asked why he had left his old job, he would only say wanted a fresh start, but never mentioned Elias or Poncha Springs. Robert Manning, on the other hand, continued a more turbulent life. He was involved in a few bar fights in Fremont County, arrested several times for small amounts of drug possession, then released for lack of evidence to prosecute. However, none of those incidents were connected to Elias or the Chaffee area. To the investigators, they were simply 2 names that had been considered and then removed from focus because no additional physical evidence or witnesses appeared over the next 20 years. Neither left Colorado, neither suddenly vanished, and neither exhibited behavior that made police suspect concealment. During these years, the Elias file sat quietly in a corner of the Chaffee County Archives, a space many investigators symbolically called the freezer, because that was where cases frozen in time were kept, waiting for new technology or new information to breathe life into them. Inside the box were interview transcripts, search maps, photos of the abandoned vehicle, inconclusive 1997 lab reports, and lists of phone numbers that were no longer in service. The thickening dust on the file cover meant many younger officers coming into the job had never even heard the name Elias Cooper until they were assigned to process old records. From the early 2000s until 2017, the case saw virtually no movement, no new witnesses, no personal belongings of Elias found in the vast mountain forests, and no matches between Elias and the unidentified bodies discovered over the years across Colorado. All the data remained sealed in time. For Elias's family, each passing year without resolution was like another layer of ice covering the truth. They could not mourn because there was no body to bury, nor could they declare Elias dead because there was no confirming evidence. Elias's brother wrote letters multiple times to the cold case unit asking for updates, but the reply was always the same. No new developments. And for nearly 20 years, the disappearance that had once drawn attention in Salida in the early days gradually turned into a quiet, sad story, mentioned only at family gatherings or on anniversaries without a grave. A case left behind in the blizzard winter of 1997, then buried deeper by the longer winter of 2 decades of silence. In 2020, when Ethan McClure was elected the new sheriff of Chaffee County, one of his first-term priorities was to review the entire list of long-neglected cold cases stored in archives. McClure, who came from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, had personally seen many seemingly hopeless cases solved thanks to new generation forensic technology. Therefore, as soon as he accessed the county's list of frozen files, including missing persons, unsolved homicides, and cases stalled since the 1980s and 1990s, McClure ordered the formation of a team to re-examine all of them in chronological order. Among the first files pulled from the shelves, Elias Cooper stood out, not because of the volume of evidence, but because of its emptiness. A vehicle abandoned without traces, a man who vanished in a blizzard. No body, no DNA, no perpetrator, no answers for 23 years. The 1999 concluding report stated clearly, no progress. Transferred to cold case unit, reevaluate when new technology becomes available. That note was exactly why McClure ordered the Elias file reopened without hesitation. He recognized that the evidence collected in 1997, the soda cup, broken pager, yellow cloth fragment, had all been analyzed within the limitations of the technology available at the time, especially DNA. In 2020, capabilities for trace analysis, sequencing degraded DNA, and mixed cell extraction had advanced far enough to offer a chance of detecting traces the 1997 lab could not identify. The decision to reopen the Elias file was formalized in a sheriff's office memo and forwarded to the county's newly established cold case team, the unit McClure had created immediately after taking office. The first thing they did was re-examine all the original evidence stored in cold storage. The plastic soda cup that had yellowed with age but still had its lid and straw intact. The cracked pager that had not completely disintegrated, the yellow cloth fragment sealed in an old-style bag but still retaining its fiber structure. Each item was re-photographed in high resolution, given new technical documentation, and assessed for retesting with next-generation DNA technology. When reviewing the 1997 lab reports, the team noted that the lab at the time had failed to recover fingerprints or DNA, but that did not rule out the presence of microscopic degraded DNA, biological material that only modern systems like STR-mix or advanced mixed cell separation technology could detect. McClure ordered the soda cup prioritized, as it was the only item likely to contain DNA from whoever had held it, even briefly. The lid, straw, plastic rim around the hand contact area, and bottom of the cup were all marked as primary targets. The pager was examined second. Technicians determined that although the electronic data was unrecoverable after 23 years, the pager's surface might still hold epithelial cell DNA in small crevices, especially around the buttons and the back of the device. The yellow cloth was categorized as evidence capable of yielding mixed DNA, having been wet multiple times and possibly containing cells from Elias, from a stranger, or from the environment. Therefore, the decision was made: all evidence would be sent to the next-generation DNA lab at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in Lakewood, one of the facilities capable of processing heavily degraded samples and decoding complex mixtures. To ensure no further damage to the DNA, the investigators repackaged everything according to 2020 standards: moisture-proof pressurized bags, insulated boxes, friction-reducing padding, and triple-sealed according to new CBI regulations. During the review, investigators noted that the soda cup had been preserved relatively well compared to 1997 field conditions, thanks to the sealed truck cabin and cold temperatures that slowed biological decay. It was considered the item with the greatest potential. Once repackaging was complete, McClure signed the transfer order and personally oversaw the handoff to CBI, an action that demonstrated the priority he placed on the Elias case. The atmosphere in the Lakewood evidence room grew tense as the forensic staff received the Elias Cooper box. After 23 years, evidence once thought useless was about to enter a second round of analysis under the light of new technology, for the first time offering hope that the disappearance buried in the 1997 blizzard might finally be illuminated by real answers. When the evidence was transferred to CBI's next-generation DNA laboratory in Lakewood, the forensic team began processing with priority given to the soda cup because it was the sample most likely to contain touch mixture DNA. Under the microscope and using an ultra-sensitive epithelial cell extraction system, they isolated an extremely small amount of DNA located on the rim of the cup lid, primarily on the plastic edge that could have been gripped directly with bare hands. STR mix analysis produced a mixed profile consisting of two components: a degraded DNA quantity consistent with prolonged exposure to a cold environment, and a relatively intact component from contact that occurred close to the date Elias went missing. The most intact component was analyzed in greater depth, and the system quickly returned a result. The DNA profile matched Victor Hale, an individual who had been on the original suspect list but was cleared due to lack of evidence. This discovery was immediately flagged as a significant hit in CBI's internal report, because the presence of a DNA trace on Elias's soda cup without a reasonable explanation demanded clarification. Next, the broken pager was removed from its new preservation packaging, and its surface was examined using modern chemical fingerprint reconstruction technology. Despite the passage of 23 years, a faint partial fingerprint in semi-morphological form still adhered to the plastic edge on the back of the pager. Using ultra-sensitive fingerprint development techniques based on nanopowder and infrared spectrum light, the lab extracted an incomplete but sufficiently characteristic print to enter into the comparison system. When cross-referenced with the records of the two original primary suspects, Victor Hale and Robert Manning, the internal AFIS system confirmed a high-level match with Victor Hale and no match with Manning. For the first time, two separate items of evidence both contained traces leading to the same individual. After analyzing the soda cup and pager, the lab moved on to the yellow fabric fragment that had been sealed since 1997. Using fiber morphology analysis, FTIR infrared absorption spectroscopy, and microstructural matching, they determined that the fabric sample was virtually identical in characteristics to the industrial yellow raincoats sold at the equipment store in Salida in the late 1990s. The exact type the Elias family said he was wearing on the day he disappeared. The tear in the fabric showed twisted fiber edges characteristic of forceful pulling rather than natural abrasion. Although it was impossible to determine exactly which part of the raincoat the fragment came from, the match in fiber composition and dye made it the first piece of evidence confirming that clothing belonging to Elias had been present inside the truck cab, something the 1997 report had been unable to prove. With clear results from all three items of evidence, the forensic team proceeded to supplementary analysis, constructing a movement reconstruction model based on the mechanical specifications of Elias's 1997 pickup truck. Digitized topographic mapping, historical weather data, and vehicle movement simulation under blizzard conditions were combined to create probability route mapping, a technique that only became available after 2015. Using the truck's weight, tire wear data from the 1996 maintenance record, average speeds for that model of pickup, and road snow conditions between January 4th, 6, 1997. The system simulated feasible routes the truck could have taken if it was not being driven by Elias himself. The model showed the truck left Poncha Springs in the late afternoon, traveled approximately 18 to 24 minutes before the blizzard reached peak intensity, and with high probability, made an unusual turn at the junction of County Road 140 and the dirt road leading to the Hutchinson Ranch area, a route Elias had never used according to family and co-workers. Notably, the model presented two possibilities: either the driver deliberately turned onto that road, or the driver was unfamiliar with the area and made a wrong turn in heavy snow. Environmental data indicated visibility was only 30-40 meters when the truck left the main road, consistent with a scenario in which the driver was not Elias, who knew every curve by heart. Once the simulation refinements were complete, investigators concluded that the truck's route was almost certainly incompatible with Elias's habits and experience. Combined with Victor's DNA and fingerprint on two critical items of evidence, this created a logical chain of connection that was unimaginable in 1997. Finally, The lab compiled a consolidated file. The soda cup contained Victor's DNA. The pager contained Victor's fingerprint. The fabric fragment matched Elias's raincoat. The reconstructed route indicated the truck was likely driven by someone else. The report was sealed and delivered directly to Sheriff Ethan McClure's office, marking the first time in 23 years that the Elias Cooper case had experienced a clear and substantial shift in investigative status. While re-examining all old files in parallel with the new DNA results, Sheriff Ethan McClure's team discovered a detail that had been dismissed in 1997. An anonymous letter sent to the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office just 2 weeks after Elias disappeared. The letter was clipped into an appendix of the case file with almost no notation beyond a faint "unable to verify," not relevant. At the time, because the content was vague and there was no way to corroborate it, the 1997 investigators treated it as a hoax or misdirected mail. However, when the case was reopened in 2020, McClure ordered a full review of all paper evidence, including this letter, since modern handwriting analysis technology could now extract information that was impossible 23 years earlier. The letter was handwritten on graph paper, unsigned, with no return address, and had been placed in a plain white envelope bearing no clear fingerprints. It contained only 3 sentences, the most striking of which was, "He has been taken somewhere else. Stop looking around Salida." In 1997, that sentence was considered meaningless due to lack of context. But now, against the backdrop of DNA results that put Victor Hale back in the center of the investigation, the letter suddenly became valuable evidence. CBI's analysis unit was asked to process the letter using advanced handwriting recognition and comparison software that employs algorithms modeling hand movement and pen stroke characteristics. Technicians digitized the entire letter, removed noise from old ink smudges, and ran it against stored handwriting samples from the 2 individuals who had once been the most scrutinized suspects, Victor Hale and Robert Manning. Victor had very little handwritten material on file beyond a few forms and signatures, but Manning was different. His 1990s file contained numerous handwritten complaints, collision reports, and documents related to prior police contacts in Fremont County. When the algorithm completed its analysis, the system reported a high degree of similarity between the anonymous letter and Robert Manning's handwriting, particularly in the downward tail of the letter G, the slight rightward slant, and the irregular letter connections at the ends of sentences. Although the match was not strong enough to be considered conclusive legal proof, it far exceeded the threshold for coincidence and was classified as a probable match, the highest designation possible for 23-year-old documents. This discovery immediately brought Manning back into the active investigative circle. It was not only the handwriting match, the letter's content contained details that had never been made public, taken Elias somewhere else. That specific wording drew intense attention from investigators because only someone involved, or with inside knowledge, would use the verb taken rather than seen, heard, or found. Taken implied active agency and physical movement of Elias away from the original location, something no one mentioned in 1997, and that never appeared in any media report or public document. Furthermore, the instruction "stop looking around Salida" gave the letter a cautionary rather than threatening tone, as if the writer wanted investigators to shift focus elsewhere without saying exactly where. Using modern technology, examiners also tested the ink and confirmed it was written with a common ballpoint pen from the 1990s, not industrial ink or a specialty pen. No usable DNA was recovered from the letter. The writer may have worn gloves, or any cellular material had completely degraded. Nevertheless, the combination of handwriting, content, and timing made the letter the first significant piece of evidence directly linking back to Manning since 1997. When the completed analysis report was returned to Sheriff McClure's office, he marked the anonymous letter as previously underexploited evidence and ordered Manning restored to the active suspect list, creating the first major turning point in the reinvestigation after more than 2 decades. Once the anonymous letter was determined to be likely connected to Robert Manning, The investigation expanded its search to areas mentioned in old files, especially locations outside Salida, as the letter hinted. One of the highest probability zones was the Texas Creek area in Fremont County. Rugged terrain, dense pine forest, deep rock crevices, and the site of the 1991 accident between Elias and Manning. Sheriff McClure requested the Terrain Task Force, together with CBI's Geospatial Technology team, to deploy LiDAR-equipped drones to scan the mountainous forest surface that was extremely difficult to access by traditional methods. LiDAR can penetrate dense tree canopy and produce high-resolution 3D maps of the ground, technology that simply did not exist in 1997. Over 3 consecutive days of scanning, thousands of elevation data points were recorded and fed into the analysis system. A technician noticed an anomalous semicircular depression on the north slope of Texas Creek, a recessed cavity several meters deep beneath an overhanging rock ledge, concealed by thick vegetation that ordinary maps could not reveal. The site was roughly 900 meters from the main dirt road, far enough to avoid casual notice, yet close to an old local trail. The very next day, a ground search team was dispatched. They climbed slippery slopes, pushed through dark sections of forest where pine canopy blocked nearly all light, and followed the drone-marked coordinates for nearly an hour. Upon arrival, they observed that the soil immediately in front of the rock cavity had a different texture, drier sandy soil than the surrounding area, and small rocks arranged unnaturally, as if they had been moved years earlier. One investigator gently brushed aside a layer of pine needles and exposed the corner of a dark gray object. Closer inspection revealed it was a weathered human femur. The area was immediately marked and secured. The forensic recovery team excavated the leaf litter and soil within the rock cavity. Within an hour, they had uncovered nearly a complete human skeleton lying in a fetal position, head tilted to the right, one arm partially covered by a large boulder. No intact clothing remained, only a few scraps of decayed yellow nylon fabric consistent with the raincoat Elias wore on his last day. There was no evidence of deep burial or a dug grave. The body had most likely been placed in the cavity and allowed to decompose naturally. A critical observation was immediately noted. Both wrist bones showed shallow but distinct circular wear grooves, consistent with prolonged binding by rope or nylon cord. The medical examiner concluded these were not animal marks. The uniformity and symmetrical placement indicated mechanical restraint applied to the bones while soft tissue was still present. No bullet holes, no knife or cut marks on the bones. The skull showed no fractures from blunt force. The left ribs displayed an old healed indentation, consistent with Elias's documented 1993 work injury. The more the team recovered, the more convinced they became that these remains belonged to Elias. For confirmation, molar teeth were collected and sent to CBI's dental DNA lab. Advances in mitochondrial and nuclear DNA sequencing from bone marrow now allowed extraction, even from remains decomposed for over 20 years. 5 days later, the results were returned to Chaffee County. DNA from the jaw matched 100% with the 1997 reference sample from Elias's daughter. Identity confirmed, Sheriff McClure informed the team that Elias Cooper was no longer a missing person, but the victim of an abduction that resulted in death. Forensic pathologists continued analyzing the skeleton for cause of death, but the complete absence of soft tissue made a definitive conclusion difficult. They determined the hyoid bone was intact, ruling out direct strangulation but not excluding other forms of mechanical asphyxia. There were no signs of severe trauma to the skull or torso. The most significant finding remained the wrist-binding marks, proving Elias had been restrained for a period before the body was placed in the cavity. The rock shelter was secluded, rarely visited, and accessible only on foot by someone who knew the exact route, suggesting the person who brought Elias there was intimately familiar with the Texas Creek area. In the 1997 records, only one individual was documented as knowing that area well: Robert Manning, who had crashed into Elias on the Texas Creek Road in 1991. The skeletal remains now became the most important physical evidence since the day Elias vanished, marking a monumental turning point in the case after more than 2 decades. Based on the new forensic results, Victor Hale's DNA on the soda cup, his fingerprint on the pager, and the route reconstruction indicating Elias's truck was likely driven by someone else, Sheriff McClure's office and the Chaffee County District Attorney formally sought an arrest warrant for Victor on charges of kidnapping, resulting in death. The judge approved the warrant quickly because the body of evidence now far exceeded mere suspicion, especially after Elias's remains were recovered at Texas Creek, showing wrist restraint marks. A tactical team took Victor into custody at an agricultural garage in Delta County, where he worked as a tractor mechanic. There was no resistance. Victor appeared stunned when handcuffed, but did not react violently. While being read his Miranda rights, he repeated only one sentence, "I didn't kill him." In the Salida interrogation room, Victor remained silent for the first half hour, then agreed to talk once informed that his DNA had been found inside Elias's truck. He admitted he was in Poncha Springs the day Elias disappeared, and that the soda cup was indeed his. When asked why his evidence was inside Elias's truck cab, something that could not be explained by coincidence, Victor stared at the floor for a long time before saying he was just doing what someone else asked. He stated that person had contacted him several weeks before Elias vanished and offered payment if he would move Elias to another location. Though he did not specify the amount, Victor described it as money I couldn't turn down while he was in financial trouble. This statement immediately reminded investigators of the 1997 anonymous letter that used the exact phrase, "taken Elias somewhere else," an uncanny match in wording. When asked who hired him, Victor hesitated and said the individual knew the Texas Creek area, had a grudge against Elias, and didn't want to show his own face. The description immediately matched everything the team already knew about Robert Manning, the man with a deep grudge against Elias after the 1991 accident, who had lived for years in Fremont County, and whose handwriting showed a probable match to the anonymous letter. Investigators cross-checked Victor's statements against known facts, the location where the body was found in Texas Creek, the 1997 letter, the unusual route taken by Elias's truck, and the history of hostility between Manning and the victim. Victor also said the person who hired him didn't want excessive violence, only to keep Elias for a while. But when things spiraled out of control, that person shut him out and disappeared. These details heightened the team's focus on Manning's true role, especially when Victor stated the man knew every crevice in Texas Creek and chose where to put Elias because hardly anyone ever went there. Victor claimed he only participated in the initial stage, approaching Elias near the shop, forcing Elias into the truck, driving him to hand him over to the client, and then leaving. He denied ever being present at the rock shelter and said that if I had known it would go that far, I would have run the moment he asked. Although his statement may have been an attempt to minimize his own culpability, Victor's admission of involvement in the kidnapping was the key element that allowed authorities to expand the investigation into the connection between him and Manning. Particularly the financial motive, the prior contacts, and the possibility they had met multiple times before the incident. Bank records, 1997 landline call logs, and witness statements about seeing Manning and Victor talking outside a bar in Buena Vista years earlier were all pulled for comparison to determine whether their relationship was coincidental or part of an actual coordinated sequence that led to Elias Cooper's death. Victor Hale was held without bail, and from that moment, Robert Manning changed from a name buried in old files to the central focus of an expanding investigation. Based on the direct testimony from Victor Hale, the analysis results of the anonymous letter, and the complete 2020 forensic conclusions, Sheriff McClure's investigative team officially finalized the arrest warrant application for Robert Manning on charges of masterminding the kidnapping that led to the death of Elias Cooper. The three key elements submitted to the judge were 1. The 1997 anonymous letter whose handwriting reached a probable match level with Manning's handwriting and contained detailed information never released to the public about taking Elias somewhere else. 2. Victor's statement describing the person who hired him as someone familiar with Texas Creek, who had a grudge against Elias and who didn't want to show his own face, which perfectly matched Manning. 3. The forensic reconstruction of the travel route and body location showing that whoever took Elias to the rock crevice had to be extremely familiar with the Texas Creek terrain, an area Manning had frequented for many years. The arrest warrant was signed the same day. The Chaffee County Tactical Team, in coordination with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, approached Manning at his mobile home near Cañon City. Manning appeared shocked when law enforcement arrived, but maintained a defiant attitude, repeatedly denying any involvement. However, with a valid warrant for masterminding the crime, he was handcuffed and transported to the investigation headquarters in Salida for questioning. In the interview room, Manning tried to stick to the story that he hadn't known anything about Elias since the 1991 accident, but investigators immediately confronted him with the evidence. The 1997 letter containing information no uninvolved person could know. The Texas Creek crevice location matching the areas where Manning had lived, hunted, and previously told police he frequented years earlier. And Victor's detailed statement about being hired to abduct Elias and hand him over to a man whose physical appearance and voice matched Manning's. When asked directly about his whereabouts during the week Elias disappeared in 1997, Manning gave a vague schedule claiming he was around Fremont County, couldn't remember specific days, and never left the area. Investigators cross-referenced old records and discovered that in 1997, Manning had given a completely different statement, that he was in Cañon City all day and had witnesses. When asked why the two statements contradicted each other, Manning only replied, "My memory isn't good." The team dug deeper into Manning's 1997 circumstances and uncovered severe financial difficulties after his accident compensation claim against Elias was delayed. Civil records showed Manning had filed for debt relief and had received multiple unexplained cash payments from private transactions. Another detail caught the investigators' attention. In 1997, Manning had contact with a group of car repair workers that included Victor Hale, something previously unverifiable because Victor's employment records were only in scattered paper form. But in 2020, when the old Buena Vista Garage personnel files were scanned and digitized, the full records became accessible. Among them was a note that Manning had visited the garage where Victor worked approximately 2 months before Elias disappeared. When confronted with this information, Manning reacted strongly, became visibly agitated, and requested an attorney, ending the interview. His refusal to provide a detailed 1997 travel itinerary further strengthened suspicion regarding Texas Creek, an area where only someone intimately familiar with it could locate the crevice where Elias's remains were found. Old hunting maps seized during the search of Manning's home also revealed he had marked a spot extremely close to the crevice with a handwritten symbol and no explanation. Ultimately, because Manning could not reasonably explain the anonymous letter, the locations he frequented matched the body disposal site, and his undeniable connection to Victor, authorities decided to hold him without bail. In the official file, he was designated the mastermind suspect in the 1997 kidnapping of Elias Cooper, marking a major turning point in the investigation after 23 years of silence. The 2020 trial at Chaffee County District Court became one of the most closely followed legal events in Colorado that year, as prosecutors presented the full 23-year timeline of the Elias Cooper case. From the 1997 blizzard night, the vehicle abandoned near Hutchinson Ranch, unavailable evidence, the case going cold for 2 decades, to the 2020 reopening under Sheriff Ethan McClure and new forensic discoveries that completely changed the nature of the crime. The timeline presentation lasted nearly 3 hours, beginning with a comparison of 1997 versus 2020 investigative technology, explaining why the case once hit a dead end and why the scattered 1990s pieces could now be logically connected. Prosecutors described Elias leaving the Poncha Springs shop in the blizzard, last seen by a witness through the reflection of a yellow raincoat, then vanishing without a trace. They reconstructed the abandoned vehicle scene and detailed the 3 pieces of evidence: the soda cup, broken pager, and yellow fabric scrap that were dismissed as meaningless in 1997. The timeline then moved to the initial investigation, analysis of suspects Victor Hale and Robert Manning, the 1997 conclusion of insufficient evidence to charge either man, the anonymous letter being downplayed, failed large-scale searches, and the case being transferred to the cold case unit in 1999. The next section, the 2020 reactivation, silenced the courtroom as prosecutors introduced the series of new forensic evidence: Victor's DNA on the soda cup, Victor's fingerprints on the pager, and the reconstructed route showing Elias's vehicle had been driven by someone else. Prosecutors also showed how the anonymous letter, after 23 years, was analyzed with modern handwriting recognition algorithms and revealed a high-level match to Manning's writing, while containing details only a participant could know. The forensic presentation of Elias's remains, discovered in the Texas Creek crevice via LiDAR drone scan, became the centerpiece. The skeleton 100% identified through dental DNA, wrist bones showing ligature marks, indicating restraint, and the body placed in an extremely concealed location only someone intimately familiar with the area would know. Criteria Manning perfectly fit. When the forensic portion ended, prosecutors began calling witnesses, among them Kendra Boyd, the only person who ever saw Elias standing next to a strange man near a blue van shortly before he disappeared, played a critical role. Kendra took the stand, clearly still nervous after all these years. She recounted seeing Elias talking to a man in dark clothing, wearing a hooded jacket, standing next to an old blue van. When asked if either defendant resembled the man she saw, Kendra said she could not positively identify anyone due to distance and poor lighting, but she emphasized that the man's build and posture were more similar to Manning than to Victor. Though not a direct identification, prosecutors treated this testimony as another piece fitting the picture of Manning, the person Victor said was present near Poncha Springs at the time and who had the strongest motive. Next, prosecutors called forensic experts to explain the technical conclusions. A CBI analyst described extracting trace DNA from the soda cup, how the STR mix system separated the two-person mixture, and how the primary profile matched Victor's known DNA. Another expert detailed analyzing the faint fingerprint on the pager, explaining chemical enhancement, nanopowder and infrared light techniques used to restore the ridge pattern, methods unavailable in 1997. A topographic surveyor showed how the LiDAR drone discovered the Texas Creek crevice, prompting audible gasps from spectators when the 3D images appeared of the site where Elias's body lay, a place almost impossible to find without modern technology. During cross-examination, Victor's attorney argued the DNA and fingerprints only proved presence, not murder, emphasizing Victor had confessed to being hired and never intending to kill Elias. Prosecutors countered that Victor actively approached Elias, forced him into the vehicle, and delivered him to Manning, conduct sufficient for kidnapping resulting in death under Colorado law, regardless of original intent. Manning's attorney attacked Victor's testimony as motivated by a deal to lessen his own sentence, but prosecutors produced multiple corroborating points: Manning's handwriting, highly matching the anonymous letter, the body location matching Manning's living and hunting areas, the simulated route showing the driver knew the terrain, and 1991 records proving Manning had previously threatened Elias. Prosecutors further stressed that the anonymous letter contained the phrase, "taking Elias somewhere else," the exact wording Victor independently used in his statement, without ever having seen the letter, making Manning's involvement nearly impossible to refute. The trial lasted over 3 weeks. Both sides argued motive, prosecutors asserting Manning never forgave the 1991 accident that injured him and caused financial ruin, while Victor was merely the hired muscle for the dirty work. The jury deliberated for more than a day. When they returned, the courtroom air was thick with tension. The verdict was read slowly. Victor Hale guilty of first-degree kidnapping resulting in death, sentenced to 35 years imprisonment. Robert Manning guilty of masterminding first-degree kidnapping resulting in death, sentenced to 45 years imprisonment, the higher sentence reflecting his role as mastermind and years-long personal vendetta. Neither man showed strong emotion. Victor lowered his head while Manning stared straight ahead without reaction. The prosecutor closed by stating that modern technology had accomplished what traditional witnesses and investigation could not in 1997, and that after 23 years, the truth had finally been brought to light, giving Elias Cooper's family the answers they deserve. After the verdict, Elias Cooper's family was finally able to receive his remains from the CBI lab. The bones were placed in a small, simple wooden box, but to the family, it was the only thing left with which they could say goodbye after 23 years of uncertain waiting. A solemn funeral was held at the Salida cemetery, where Elias's brother, 2 sisters, and nieces and nephews stood around the grave, each placing a flower on the box. When the first shovelful of earth fell, many could not hold back tears, not just for the loss, but because they could finally grieve completely instead of being trapped between faint hope and decades-long despair. At the service, one of Elias's nephews read a letter the family had written to him, saying he was lost in the blizzard but never forgotten, that although the truth came late, it was still the truth. The funeral closed a heavy journey the family had carried for half their lives. Meanwhile, the Salida community reacted strongly upon learning that the 2 perpetrators, especially Robert Manning, who had lived and worked normally among them for years, were responsible for Elias's kidnapping and death. Older residents remembered seeing Manning in stores, gas stations, or hunting areas, never suspecting he had planned to take a fellow Salida resident to a remote mountain area and leave him to die. Many felt chills realizing that for 23 years, the mastermind had lived within a few dozen miles of where Elias vanished without ever being suspected. The community also questioned whether the case could have been solved earlier had technology been better or the anonymous letter not been dismissed. A town hall meeting was held after the trial where Sheriff Ethan McClure detailed the reinvestigation process and candidly evaluated the 1997 investigation's mistakes. He stressed that most limitations stemmed from underdeveloped technology, no surveillance cameras, no advanced analytical infrastructure, no ability to process trace DNA. However, he also acknowledged areas for improvement, particularly in classifying and preserving anonymous letters, evaluating seemingly minor evidence, and expanding geographic search capabilities. McClure assured residents the sheriff's office had completely overhauled procedures for missing persons cases in severe weather, including immediate digital mapping and prioritizing modern forensic techniques. He thanked the Cooper family for their patience and cooperation over the years and recognized the contributions of the forensic team, CBI, and the Salida community when the case was reopened. Following the meeting, the sheriff's office finalized the legal file and closed the case as solved, 2 defendants convicted. The final dossier was sealed and archived, but this time not under a shroud of hopeless silence, under a definitive conclusion. In the months after the trial, the Cooper family began rebuilding their lives with a new sense of peace. They held a small memorial and hung Elias's photo in the woodworking shop, his workplace on his last day, as a reminder that despite the loss, his memory lives on in everyone in Salida. In the town, Elias's story became a symbol of perseverance, technological progress, and a community's refusal to give up on the truth. Some residents proposed placing a small memorial plaque near the Poncha Springs entrance, where Elias was last seen, as a reminder of the importance of looking out for one another in small mountain towns of Colorado. Sheriff McClure, in his final report, wrote one simple line: "Time does not erase truth. It only requires us to find the right tools to see it." He repeated that sentence at the last team meeting when they officially closed the file. By the end of 2020, the Elias Cooper case, one of Colorado's most mysterious 1990s disappearances, was marked complete, closing a 23-year circle that began with a blizzard, silence, hope, pain, and finally justice. And when winter once again blanketed Salida, many in the community believed Elias had finally come home to where he belonged. The story of the Elias Cooper case, a regular working man from Salida, Colorado, who vanished in a 1997 blizzard and only received justice after 23 years, is not simply a cold case eventually solved. It also reflects many issues in modern American life: society's reliance on technology, community responsibility, the importance of preserving evidence, and especially how people cope with prolonged loss. The fact that an apparently meaningless soda cup became the decisive piece thanks to next-generation DNA technology shows that in today's world, preserving even the smallest information and evidence can completely alter an investigation's outcome. This reminds every individual of the importance of care in work, in communication, and in record-keeping. Modern America runs on data, and Elias's story proves that small data can sometimes save big stories. At the same time, the emergence of a witness like Kendra Boyd, who stayed silent out of fear for years, reflects a common social problem. Worry about getting involved causes many people to hesitate to speak up. Yet the reality is that had Kendra provided full information from the beginning, the Cooper family might not have waited more than 2 decades. The lesson is clear. Unintentional silence can prolong someone else's pain, and every community member plays a vital role in keeping each other safe. The case also highlights the danger of old grudges left unresolved, as with Robert Manning. In today's high-pressure American society, where stress and conflict easily accumulate, seeking counseling, mediation, or community intervention is essential to prevent negative consequences that can last years. Finally, the perseverance of Elias's family and Sheriff McClure's reinvestigation remind us that justice can arrive late, but it is not unattainable, so long as people do not abandon faith in truth and continue demanding accountability from the justice system. Thank you for following the 23-year journey to justice for Elias Cooper. If you'd like to see more cases cracked after decades, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring mysteries once thought buried under the dust of time.